Pokemon theories are a lot of fun. There are a lot of unanswered questions, unexplained mysteries, things that don't make sense, or otherwise interesting details in the Pokemon world that make for some fantastic theories, and the theorizing of it all and trying to make sense of all of this interesting stuff is just a really fun time, particularly on YouTube. Obviously, anyone who makes a theory would love to see their theory come true, but in my opinion, when it comes to Pokemon theories, it's more about presenting a really fascinating idea that has evidence to back it up, and is more so just about the fun of it all than it actually eventually becoming true one day. And with that in mind, even though I personally have come up with a bunch of theories myself, I've also come up with some that, while being really good and really cool in my opinion, were also just flat out wrong. But even though they were wrong, they still presented some really interesting ideas and made a lot of sense as well. So today I thought I would go ahead and shine the spotlight on these really cool theories that unfortunately weren't true, and give you guys my personal top 5 Pokemon theories that I have created that were wrong. Now, the point of today's video isn't for me to showboat or to tell you guys how great of a theorist I am. More specifically, it's mostly just about revisiting these ideas and looking at the fact that even though they were wrong, they still presented some pretty cool ideas and made sense at the same time, and mostly, once again, it's just for the fun of it all. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at it. These are my top 5 personal Pokemon theories that were wrong, and they are in no particular order as well, so there's not necessarily a best and a worst, just a top 5, so without any further ado, let's get into it. The first theory I'm going to talk about was one of my more recent theories, where I was talking about the idea of the Generation 8 Pokemon region possibly being based on Greece. Now, very clearly I was very wrong about this one, and I will own up and take that L, but nevertheless, when I presented this theory, the idea and the evidence that I presented along with it made a lot of sense at the time and still does make sense now, even if it didn't actually come to pass. So, in a nutshell, and by the way guys, I'm just going to be going over the gist of each of these theories. If you would like to see the entire theory in full, you can check out their individual videos in the theory playlist on my channel. But with that being said, the idea of this theory centered around, believe it or not, the legendary Pokemon book that is in the 3rd Pokemon movie that took place almost 20 years ago. Now you might be asking, why are you looking at some random thing from a movie that occurred almost 20 years ago to predict the current Pokemon region? Well, let me tell you, the legendary book that is in the 3rd Pokemon movie that depicts various legendary Pokemon also had some legendary Pokemon in it that we currently have not seen within the Pokemon world that also seem to correctly show off things that happened in the future of Pokemon after this occurred. So for instance, we see this fairy-like creature that could very easily be showing a depiction of what Xerneas would become as a fairy-type Pokemon in Generation 6. Once again, because these are all artists' renditions, as Molly's father says in the movie. Furthermore, and the one that's really convincing, is the next page that shows a sun-like legendary Pokemon that is shining itself on some hibiscus flowers, which obviously we know there is now a sun legendary in Generation 7, and hibiscus flowers definitely come from Hawaii, which is where the Alola region is based, and the entire setting of this picture looks very tropical as well, so this definitely looked pretty convincing as a sign of the Alola region and the legendary Pokemon Solgaleo as well. So with some decent predictions and foreshadowings for Generations 6 and 7, I thought it might be possible that we could get a foreshadowing for Generation 8 as well. And there is one more unexplained picture in this book that depicts some legendaries or depicts a situation that we were not completely familiar with, and it is this one right here. In this picture, we can see some unknown, but we can also see a random guy that seems to be talking to them. And as Loxton suggests, who was the guy who originally came up with this part of the theory, who I took some notes from for my own theory, this could actually be a depiction of Arceus, because not only is he commanding the unknown, it seems like, which we know Arceus to have done, but the depiction of this man very much looks like what God is depicted as in many religions. So it seems to line up very nicely, especially especially when you look at the pillars and the setting of the picture as well, which very well could represent the spear pillar in the Sinnoh region as well. But then I decided to take it a step further, because even though the setting does resemble the spear pillar, it is not a perfect depiction, and because the pillars in this picture are very Greek in nature, I hypothesized that we could be seeing a Greek-based region for Generation 8, since once again Generations 6 and 7 had also been foreshadowed in this book. So rather than just depicting a Generation 4 scenario, I took this picture to mean that it could possibly be predicting or foreshadowing the entire 8th generation as a whole, where not only are we going to get Generation 4 remakes, which could still very well happen, but we are also going to get a brand new region set in Greece as well. Obviously, this didn't come true, but it was a lot of fun to discuss, so I highly recommend checking out the video on it, like I said, if you want to see the whole thing. Next up is one of the very first theories that I ever came up with on the channel when I just barely started to do actual videos as opposed to just remixes, and that was the idea that the Sun and Moon player characters, Elio and Selene, were actually from Kalos, and Calum, the player character from X and Y, was your father. Now, I know that this sounds like a very big claim, and obviously it was also very wrong, but even still to this day, it makes all the sense in the world. So where I began this theory was specifically from the appearance of the male player character himself. I noted at the time that he looks distinctly like Calum, and if you put them side by side, he almost looks like a younger version of Calum, like he could be a younger version of himself or even his son. And it was also specified at the time that the player characters in this game were not from the Alola region and had just barely moved there, so they obviously could be from any region, and this just lent more weight to the idea that they could be from Kalos and this could be Calum's son. From there is where the theory really began to ramp up, because from there is when we began to pay attention to the player character's mother. We only had a brief glimpse of her at the time, but looking at her, especially in the limited capacity that we did, she seemed to resemble an older version of Shauna, once again also from the Kalos region and X and Y, who it just so happens had a brief love interest in the player character from X and Y as well. And with Shauna even going so far as to say that she was going to travel to a faraway region someday, really just put all of the pieces together so perfectly that Elio and Selene were indeed from Kalos, their father is indeed Calum, and their mother was indeed an older version of Shauna. I even put it out there, even though I didn't have any evidence for it, that Calum could be the champion of this region, and you could end up battling him as a former player character battle, kinda like what we see with Red and Ethan, and overall this just made for the perfect, mind-blowing scenario that would have been amazing if it actually happened, and it had all the evidence in the world to suggest that it was going to happen as well. But obviously, not a single thing about this was true. It was completely and utterly false, which, even though I know I'm a bit biased here, is a real shame just because of how much sense this made, and because of the fact that this scenario is definitely a lot better and more interesting than the non-existent scenario that we actually got. Speaking of early Sun and Moon theories revolving around the player character, another one that I came up with around this time that sort of acted as a follow-up to that last one involved and focused more so on the female player character as opposed to the male one. In this theory, I was focusing on the fact that we had seen at the time some pre-release trailer footage of the player characters' names, Elio and Selene, and from this I was able to derive the fact that Selene gets her name from the Greek goddess of the moon who is also named Selene. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Selene, the Greek goddess, is also known to go by the name Phoebe, who we just so happen to have a character in the Pokemon world with that name, and she just so happens to have a very, very Hawaiian-like appearance. It was already highly speculated before this that Phoebe could be from Alola thanks to her very Hawaiian-like attire, but this really just took it to the next level. And then from there, when you compared the look of Phoebe to the look of the would-be mother of the player character in Shauna, they definitely look like they could be related to one another in some way, maybe even as sisters. So the idea here is that Phoebe was actually the aunt of the player character, and as you played through the game, you could eventually find out this fact. Just like I said in the previous theory, you could eventually battle with Kalos as your father if you played as the male player character. So the idea that I came up with is, depending on which gender you played as in the game, you would either encounter Kalos as maybe your final battle, or you would encounter Phoebe as one of your final battles. And that way you could sort of have a family revelation, if you will, depending on which version of the game you played, which would also give you incentive to play as the other gender as well to get the full story. Once again though, as with every other theory in this video, it was completely false. Not a single part of this theory was true, but nevertheless it would have been amazing and an amazing part to Pokemon Sword and Shield if it had actually happened. Now this next one is a different sort of pick because I was never trying to portray this theory as true. It actually came from one of my terrible Pokemon theories that make perfect sense video, so I was never trying to say that this actually could be the case, but nevertheless it is still a pretty dang good theory if I do say so myself. This whole idea was centered around the meme that Professor Oak is actually a criminal mastermind and the leader of, at the time, all of the evil teams, as you could take most of the evil team logos that were present at the time and you could spell out the word Gramps with them, which obviously showed that Professor Oak isn't who he seems to be. So basically, I just took this idea and ran with it and tried to find some evidence that this could actually be the case, and believe it or not, I actually found some pretty convincing evidence in its favor. Once again, you can go check out that terrible Pokemon theory video if you want the full story, but the biggest pieces of evidence I had against Professor Oak and his true identity was the fact that in Johto, for instance, one of the main targets of Team Rocket is the radio tower, and it just so happens to be the case that Professor Oak runs a radio show from that specific radio tower, so it very well could be the case that this heist was pulled off with the help of some inside information. And in the case of another evil team, Team Galactic, they are headquartered in Eterna City, which just so happens to be the place where Professor Oak has a home in the Sinnoh region. So all of this is just lining up way too well to not be an actual fact. And I think it's only a matter of time before Professor Oak reveals his true colors, and we finally get to see him for the criminal mastermind that he truly is. The final theory we're going to talk about in this video is also another one of my more recent ones, and it had to do with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee and Meltan and Melmetal. Meltan, even though it was introduced in Pokemon Go, was first introduced into the main series games via Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So because it was introduced in tandem with the Kanto remakes, it seemed like it was going to have some connection to the Kanto region as well. And this theory centered around the idea of explaining that connection to Kanto and how it would connect to the, at the time, unknown Generation 8 titles as well. This theory also acted as a follow-up to the first theory I talked about, with Generation 8 having a Greece-based region, and it all started with Cinnabar Island. In the theory, Cinnabar Island was going to be Kanto's connection to Meltan, because not only was Cinnabar Island home to a similar sort of legendary Pokemon in Mewtwo, as that's where it was created, but at the time of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee's promotion and release in 2018, we were just starting to get the very first details about the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution movie, and with them going back to Kanto for the movies at this time as well, it just seemed like, with the movie being focused on Mewtwo, and with Cinnabar also having Mewtwo, that there would be some kind of promotion in the movie for Meltan, and that's how it would connect back to Mewtwo in the games as well. And the thing that really solidifies Meltan's connection to Cinnabar Island is the fact that Cinnabar is not only the name of a color, but it is also the name of a rock, and this rock is where you can most commonly extract the element mercury, which is what Meltan is based on. So there is your connection to the Kanto region, and as far as the connection to Generation 8, it just so happens that the name Cinnabar actually comes from the Greek word Kinabari, which is where I hypothesized that the Generation 8 region would be based on. So at the time, it just seemed to all come together so perfectly, and I was significantly confident at the time that we would be seeing a Greece-based region for Generation 8. It just seemed to all come together so well, but obviously Obviously, all of this was just completely wrong. There was no connection, there was no Meltan event in Cinnabar Island, there was no Greece-based region, and it was completely and utterly false despite making perfect sense. Well, there you have it, everybody. Those were my top 5 personal Pokemon theories that were completely wrong. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, Pokemon theories for me are more just about the fun of it all and putting things together that make sense, as opposed to actually trying to prove something true, because then when you inevitably get something wrong, you can still have fun with it and it can still make sense, like these theories did here. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and let me know down in the comments below all your thoughts about any of these theories, and if you would like to see the full video on any of them, you can go to the theory playlist on my channel to check them out. If you're new to the channel as well, be sure to subscribe for more Pokemon content all the time, and if you'd like to support further, which really helps out videos like this, you can do so by checking out my Spotify, listening to my Pokemon remixes there, and checking out my Pokemon Cardinal project. With all that being said though, I will be back on Saturday with another video, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you can be notified as soon as it goes live. And with all that being said, I love you guys very much, and until the next one, as always, I will smell you guys later.